Tuesday here on Camino Island, overlooking the Bay of Port Susan on a blue and yet cloudy day here on the island. This week we will finish up our Rubaiyat readings and commentary. On Thursday will be Quatrain 75, and today is Quatrain 73. And it's a zinger, so it's got a lot of meat in it if you're a vegetarian. And let's begin. I'm going to read first. Omar Khayyam says, "Ah, love, could thou and I with fate conspire to grasp this sorry scheme of things entire, would not we shatter it to bits and then remold it nearer to the heart's desire?"
Stanza 73. Ah, love, could thou and I with fate conspire to grasp this sorry scheme of things entire, would not we shatter it to bits and then remold it nearer to the heart's desire? Paraphrase. Ah, my divine beloved, could thou and I, working together with cosmic law, conspire to banish spiritual lawlessness and ignorance from the earth, could we but grasp the reins of humanity, that runaway team of fractious horses, might it not be possible to spare human beings the pain and suffering they endure? Might we not then remold their lives to correspond to the innate idealism of their hearts?
This is one of the longer commentaries of Yogananda as we come down the home stretch, and I'm going to use it as a checklist. Sometimes I just go off on my own, or at least pick up the thread of it and have the opportunity to do so. But today we've got a lot to cover here. And Yogananda makes the comment, Omar makes it clear that he laments not the cosmic scheme of things, but the confusion of God's children have introduced into the picture. The fault is ours if we ignore divine law. And so it's an interesting point. As we grow in sensitivity, naturally we want for all other people a release from suffering and the finding of happiness. And yet this commentary goes into how do we help other people? Let's see. He writes, for a work to be truly good, meaning for us to do good work in the world, to do good things, it cannot express our merely human desires. And so I think of the great philanthropists of down through history and people who generously give of themselves. There needs to be, for that gift to be successful for them spiritually, but also meet with an appropriate level of gratitude and receptivity, and therefore fulfillment of the initial impulse to give. It needs to be given sensitively, and not just because I want to fix somebody. I can think of many instances in my life where somebody stepped in across, let's just say, my boundaries in order to help me. And so it would appear, and so perhaps it was intended. But the form and the feeling of that help, unasked for, which can be wonderful, there were times I can recall when it felt invasive, when it felt critical. I'm going to help you because you're such a schmuck. Well, you may indeed be a schmuck, and you may indeed need help. But if it's given with that critical attitude, it taints the gift, does it not? He writes further, how to do good. Happiness itself, though a universal good, must never be imposed on others. In fact, he writes, it never can be. Reforms, if not undertaken in keeping with the divine will, create disharmony. Now, I just feel to read some of this because it's so well written, and I don't trust my own mind to just pull these clear and important thoughts out of the ether. The good that we do must be offered with love and respect for the free will of others. Do you see the difference? Charity must never deprive its recipients of their divine dignity. When giving, this is an interesting point. When giving, we should encourage others to give at least something in return. Now, this has been the policy, if you want to call it that. I don't usually think in those terms, but this has been the experience of the work of Ananda since its founding over 50 years ago by Swami Kriyananda, a direct disciple of Paramahansa Yogananda and the editor of this wonderful scripture. And what he found back, and even before the founding of Ananda as such, he would give yoga classes and meditation classes at different cities in the Northern California, centered around San Francisco and the Bay Area. And he was perfectly willing to not, quote, make people pay. I mean, if they couldn't pay, of course, he would not withhold spiritual teachings. But he quickly found that those who gave nothing in return, assuming they could, of course, give something, devalued the gift of what he had to offer. And so when somebody would state that they didn't have money for his course, he'd ask them to help maybe set up chairs, or maybe they could bring some cookies to serve at the break. He would always invite people to give something back for the sake of their own dignity, for the sake of, if somebody doesn't feel the same or not the same, but feel some measure of appreciation for the gift that is being given, maybe not in full measure to what I might feel in my impulse to give, but at least some. The refinement of consciousness is automatically wants to reciprocate, at least to some extent, to whatever extent one can under one's circumstances. That's different than imposing a demand to give back. It has to be done sensitively, and so what one tries to do, what Swami Kriyananda did so well, and we, following his example, have tried to do, is invite somebody to help or maybe pay a lesser amount. When you're dealing with the public and different levels of refinement, you often just fall into a policy pattern. And so, you're answering the phone and you don't know the person. So admittedly, on an institutional level, it's hard to be that refined and sensitive. But it's an important point. And though I'm not a policymaker for our government or our society, when I contemplate the legislative entitlements that are offered, and I don't want to get into politics, but what is it, that phrase, you bite the hand that feeds you? Nobody wants to be reduced to poverty and dependency. Not really. They may think they are enjoying a handout, but it works to the opposite effect. Anyway, I can't solve that. We should make them, the recipient, feel our gratitude for their assistance. They will not be benefited if they are made to receive our kindness only passively. Then he goes on to talk about a diamond cutter, and I don't know anything about diamond cutters, but what he says makes some sense. I think of an artist, but he uses the example of a diamond cutter cutting a diamond. The diamond cutter generally can't just have an idea of what he wants the diamond to look like. He has to look for the natural, well, he calls them cleavage. I don't know what to make of that term, but in a rock. But anyway, study the natural patterns in the rock or something before he makes his cut. So his cut will be successful. The diamond won't shatter, perhaps, or do something he doesn't want. We must take into the account realities of other people and never seek to impose on them our own will. And as we grow spiritually, as I said earlier, we naturally feel to want to help people. We naturally want to see people, if we've achieved by our effort some degree of contentment and happiness, we would like to see other people have that. And yet, he learned soon enough that he must deal with things and people as they are. Mental instability of any kind, for example, and sorrow is a kind of mental instability, must be cured sensitively, often gradually, lest too sudden a shock, even of joy, aggregate and not cure the disturbance. There are many stories, and I don't have time to repeat the stories per se, but there are stories of rishis like Yogananda recognizing that though they had the power to transmit a high state of consciousness, that they recognized in certain people who otherwise seemed to want it, that if they were to receive it, it would have deleterious effects. I remember in one story he said that if I gave this to you, you could not stand your life after that. And he didn't say you'd go mad, but the contrast between that elevated state of consciousness and one's ordinary, mundane, and ego-active consciousness besotted with material habits, the contrast would be destructive. In other words, destructive to the wholeness of your consciousness. It's interesting, this is going to take a little long today, but it's interesting that some people in modern psychology have equated the uniqueness of spiritual consciousness with madness. And it's only, it might look like that, but divine consciousness, as Sri Yukteswar said, is not incapacitating. We have this romantic image that saints are, sort of out of it, as they used to say, and incapable of doing anything with any competency. But that's really not true. The saints are highly competent. They have strong concentration and willpower and energy. Think of Jesus flogging the money sellers, or whatever those things were called, money changers in the temple in Jerusalem. Great power do saints have. And so it might be that certain forms of mental instability might outwardly appear to be a kind of divine madness, let's say. But it's not true. The disintegration of the ego can go in one of two directions. The disintegration of the ego into the fulfillment of the soul, or the disintegration of the ego into madness, into insanity. It's still the disintegration of madness, but one is going in an upward direction towards superconsciousness, and the other is descending into subconscious chaos. Okay, enough of my expertise in human psychology. Okay, it's right and good that each of us do our best to make this world a better place to live in. God is not pleased with selfishness. Even the devotee who remember that beginning chapter in autobiography where Sri Yukteswar looks sternly at Yogananda and says something to the effect of, do you want the divine chana, meaning the divine blessings for yourself? And then they enter into a conversation where Yogananda complains about organizations and all the problems that people bear and all the critique that the leader But anyway, he resolves after that conversation to do his best to create hives where the honey of God's presence can be tasted. And thus it is that those in the tradition of yoga, Raja Yoga, those who go off to the caves, must be certain that they're, or off to monasteries even. I remember my first impulse in grade school to go into a preparatory seminary was not unmixed with fear at facing adolescence, actually, and retreating into the safety of the monastery. That was very vivid to me even then. There was still a divine inspiration, mind you, but it was mixed. And so we mustn't hide behind spirituality. I've known many devotees on the yoga path who complain of having distaste for meeting the public, for example, being friendly, who are feeling the vibrations of other people. And I don't doubt that some of that's true, but let's get over it. Let's serve, because God is in all of those people. And if it's your dharma, and at this point to serve the spiritual work by being in the public with people, get over it. Okay. The more we live in the awareness of God's presence by concentration, meditation, and devotion, the more surely we shall develop our own latent powers. Those powers, born of our attunement, can be used to overcome every difficulty we face. Now, this is interesting. It gets more interesting. Life was made purposely difficult for us so that we might develop our inner powers towards the solution of life's mysteries. We can't achieve the infinity of God, the power of God, not by seeking power, but we are not going to achieve that state of union with God wherein all the powers of the universe reside without self-effort, without mighty effort, considering where we are right now, where if we miss a meal, we get dizzy and lightheaded and grumpy. He moves on into a section called the Divine Drama. People often demand to know why life is filled with so much tragedy and pain. The answer is, I'm just going to read this. If the world were perfect with nothing but angels flitting about, the show would hold no interest for us, no struggle, no growth, and in the end, no worthwhile victory. If the end of a drama were known to us from the start, it would lose its fascination. For a play to be successful, it must have suspense. It must beguile and puzzle and bewilder, and must, above all, conclude with a glorious end. Later on, he says, is life so difficult to understand? I love this one. Well, of course it is. If it were easy to grasp the drift and purpose of this great spectacle, what would that say about the skill of the dramatist? Why am I laughing? The divine playwright has concealed the nature of his plot, which in itself straightforward, behind endless subplots and complexities. When the soul attains self-realization and eternal freedom, it understands, and then with clapping wings, it applauds enthusiastically. Yes, people foolishly blame God when their lives go awry. Let them work rather to develop the unlimited divine power that lies asleep within them. Let's push on to final victory. And so we are reaching the final victory of the Rubaiyat in just a few days on Thursday. And on Friday, we begin a new adventure, which we are going to withhold from you so that you'll tune in on Friday and see what it is. Ha, ha, ha. Okay, great souls. This is such a wonderful scripture. It would be lovely to study it with a group of friends and with even greater depth. But I hope those of you who have tagged along with this little journey of ours have found in it, notwithstanding, some inspiration. Okay, you great souls. I have overgone my